Thank you, Kevin. And wow, okay, they voted. So this is the new world that we live in now. And as I was putting the finishing touches to my talk yesterday, and the news was rolling in at the time regarding Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation, I decided that despite what my title would otherwise indicate, today I'm going to talk about hope. And I'm here as an advocate, but more importantly, I'm here as a survivor of domestic and sexual violence, and I'm going to tell you about my journey to find hope. And my story begins back home in Puerto Rico, in a chaotic home where you lived in fear of each passing moment, and you wondered if at some point something would set off my dad. And one of the most vivid memories I have was just one of the many nights where my dad became angry, was yelling and breaking things around the house. And I can't remember why, but my mom asked me to quickly take my younger brother to his room and stay and keep him distracted. As a child, of course, I was afraid, but every time my mom asked me to keep my brother safe, I just focused on imagining myself as a superhero with a really cool shield. And never mind that I always imagined myself as Xena the warrior princess. It was my job to keep my brother safe, and so I accepted that challenge. I think back to those moments and wonder how a 9-year-old could somehow be present enough to listen and know what was happening outside, watchful in case there was something I needed to react to. But I also focused on the game I was playing with my brother. I asked myself, how did a 9-year-old know what to do in those moments? And all I can say today is that I just focused on staying brave and strong. And many of us know that cognitively, a common response to a threat is flight, freeze, or fight. And in those moments, I chose to fight. But behind my superhero shield, deep inside, what kept me going was hope. And the hope that it would soon all be over. And that if I stayed strong long enough, it would eventually end. And it always did, eventually. And my goal those nights was always to just survive. I was recently reminded of my own experience of hope in the face of fear by a group of young football players. Many of these young men also live in chaotic homes with an adult that uses violence. But in our conversations, they told me that they were actually motivated by verbal abuse, which I asked myself, why? How is that possible? And I was initially confused, but then I remembered my own childhood and the stories of many other survivors in my life. These young men told me, verbal abuse motivates me to prove them wrong. And that right there is hope, and it's resilience. And in the face of fear, survivors create hope and resilience. And as an adult now, I understand that the strength and courage of survivors is so immense and so indescribably powerful that in moments of despair, we still have hope. Survivors live and breathe hope. So what is hope? I'm not just going to give you the dictionary's definition. Psychologists describe hope as the belief that the future will be better than the present. And more importantly, it's coupled with the belief that you have the power to make it so. And survivors and our allies, these last 2 weeks, it's been a difficult time to hold on to hope, and today, certainly that's the case. It has been 10 days since Dr. Ford's testimony, and as I speak, our elected officials have already decided that they chose not to believe a survivor. This isn't about politics. This is about whether or not we believe survivors. And today is one of those historic days that I know I'm never going to forget. In these last 10 days, I have witnessed some of the most courageous actions of resistance by survivors across the nation. Survivors coming forward and telling their stories in an effort to remind the world, we're not going away and we will no longer be silent. I will never forget, as Oprah spoke these words, we have all lived too many years in a culture broken by brutally powerful men, and for too long, women have not been heard or believed if they dared to speak their truth to the power of those men. But their time is up. And as a survivor, I say, this is our time. This is our time to rise up and speak our truth, and we will not go away until we reach our deepest held hope, rooted in that very first moment of fear, that this one day will end. And one day we can live in a future without violence. For me, this is more than professional, this is personal. So we know as survivors that we can't do this work alone, and it's too great a burden to hold without allies. The work to end gender-based violence is truly an effort in healing and transforming together. Over the past 4 years, my journey to find hope has brought me to the work of engaging men and youth as allies. And Futures Without Violence has a long history of building programming and public awareness campaigns to engage men and boys, and these last 2 weeks have been no exception. On September 18th, in support of Dr. Ford's willingness to speak out publicly and testify before the Senate, the male board members of Futures Without Violence, including an administrative and presiding judge of the Cleveland Municipal Court, issued a statement where they voiced, "We are a group of men with varying political and legal views. However, we are united in our belief that it can no longer be solely the job of women to speak out about sexual harassment and violence that is too frequently forced upon them and which they too frequently suffer and bear alone in silence. We believe that too often these stories do not see the light of day for fear of the hateful backlash that often follows when women summon the courage to publicly challenge those who abuse them." Following this statement, and in partnership with the Phenomenal Woman Action Campaign, Futures Without Violence took out an ad in the New York Times where 1,600 men signed their names in support of Dr. Ford, inspired by the 1,600 Black women who bought an ad in 1991 in support of Anita Hill. We're going to watch a quick video about that. Kevin, it's on you.
You have inspired and you have enlightened men in America to listen respectfully to women survivors and men who have survived sexual attack. And that is a profound public service, regardless of what happens with this nomination.
No one should face harassment, death threats, and disparaging comments by cheap-shot politicians simply for telling the truth.
Chairman, you and I were both here 27 years ago. At that time, the Senate failed Anita Hill. I said I believed her, but I'm concerned that we're doing a lot less for these three women today.
constant harassment and death threats, and I've been called the most vile and hateful names imaginable.
a day like today, we ask ourselves, what do we do next? And what is there left to hope for? So some might say that it's foolish to hold out hope. In fact, I recently sat with a well-respected professor of psychiatry from Yale University, and we contemplated the road ahead. And he turned to me and said, I believe that we're past the point of no return. And although I'm not naive, I responded, that can't be true. And his response to me was, hope is for the young. And like those knights protecting my brother with my superhero shield, I decided in that moment again that I was going to accept that challenge. Perhaps hope is for the young, but I refuse to believe that as well. In fact, contrary to what most might believe, hopeful people are realists. You see, unlike wishful thinking, hope is a combination of fervent belief, empowerment, and agency. And the hopeful know that it takes work to achieve a better future. Emily Dickinson writes, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tunes without the words and never stops at all. But there are many obstacles that make it hard to hope. Depression, anxiety, stress, trauma, and previous failures, such as today. In the past, and so very present, we are presented with all 5 of those obstacles. So the realist in me decided to do some research into the science of hope, which I learned with the help of Dr. Shane Lopez, a senior scientist at Gallup. And as it turns out, those who are hopeful are 14% more productive, which is fantastic because we have a lot of work to do. And on occasion, the cardinal components of hope can block pain by releasing the brain's endorphins and encephalins, the body's own version of morphine. And there are 4 main characteristics to the hopeful. I'm going to talk about them. First, the hopeful make plans, usually about 2 or 3 plans that are clear, specific, and additive. But we are always prepared for the obstacles and we know how to bounce back. When faced with another failure, we immediately come with multiple new plans. Does this sound familiar to anyone in the work that we do? Yeah. So in our work, we always have a safety plan. When a survivor comes to us with a new problem, maybe they're facing homelessness or they're not able to maintain a job because of the chaotic nature of their lives and the trauma that makes it difficult to get through their day, we always come up with a plan. We work with them to find safe shelter. We provide them with economic empowerment services. We always try and find a way. Which brings me to the next characteristic. The hopeful ask for help. As advocates, when we don't know how to support a survivor or we don't yet have the resources, we find someone that does. When we are experiencing the secondary trauma from a long day of hearing the stories of our clients, we turn to our colleagues and friends. We slowly learn what it means to practice self-care so that we can sustain our work. As a field, we build coalitions and task forces and partnerships so we can support one another in our work. We believe it's our duty to work together to find the solutions that can lead to that better tomorrow. As survivors, however, when we begin to sink into despair, it's harder to ask for help. We don't always know where to go or who it is safe to talk to. And in fact, it takes survivors a lot of courage to try and find help or find that person that's safe to talk to. The survivors I have worked with and those in my community of survivors all have expressed how alone they can feel, which is why I believe so passionately in doing the work that I do. I'm here to help survivors like me feel less alone, so that perhaps slowly other survivors can summon the strength that they all have inside of them to seek for help. The Me Too movement is just one example where survivors have begun to find themselves less alone. Another ad created by the New York Times, this one right here, was one of those instances where I felt less alone. This is a provocative ad. It speaks to the power dynamic that continues to play out even in Dr. Ford's testimony. Survivors that come forward are often faced with that he said, she said skepticism. But if you look closer, what that ad tells me is that I'm not the only one. And the third characteristic, the hopeful reassess and begin plotting new goals and plans when something isn't working, which is why we love strategic planning so much. And since the beginning of this movement, our strategies to end gender-based violence have evolved over time to meet new challenges and to make new opportunities for change. This is a good thing because society has changed even over the course of the last 40 years. What was once a private family issue that no one would speak of, today we have services for survivors that never existed before. We began as one woman, quietly taking in what we used to call the battered women into their homes, and has grown into a movement with services that continue to expand as we speak. And we're convening here today because we now publicly acknowledge that gender-based violence is wrong, and we will keep fighting until all can live free of violence. But like today, we are faced with new challenges, and so we must continue to reassess and make new plans. And fourth, the final characteristic is a little bit more amorphous. When faced with the pain and frustration over a defeat, the hopeful create a story. They give meaning to their experience. Today is no different. We already have begun to give meaning to this moment. Despite the ache and wounds that we have suffered, we believe that if nothing else, these past few weeks have given a voice to so many survivors that it has furthered the conversation and shone a light to the public prevalence of sexual violence. It has inspired allies to come forward and has reminded us that we are not alone. In times like these, some might ask, but how do I stay hopeful? What do I do? And again, the science tells us that the best thing you can do is to find something that you are truly passionate about and invest in it heavily. Find what gives you that meaning and purpose. Surround yourself with those that are equally passionate and hopeful. And I believe that I'm surrounded by those people today. By a show of hands, who here has ever described or believed that they were meant to do this work or have referred to it as your calling? It's a good number. And how many of us have ever experienced a moment of doubt, fear, or desperation that the problem was too grand to solve? And yet, how many of us have been stunned and floored by the power of survivors, their perseverance, and their courage? And so, none of us are alone. We're all here together in this room. In this room, we have created the power for hope, and our whole movement is built on hope. When we have the courage to make that better future, Audre Lorde tells us, when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I'm afraid. Now I want to pivot and talk more about the work that I'm truly passionate about, the work that makes it easier for me to keep hoping. Over the course of the last 4 years, I have fully immersed myself in the work to engage men and boys. I have learned a lot about the possibility for change through Futures Without Violence, history of, in the field, engaging men. I'm going to share some more about that history and my role as the manager of the national and international communities of our program, Coaching Boys into Men. So, oh, skipped. I'm getting too excited with this clicker. Okay, there we go. All right, so Futures history and engaging men actually started in 2000 when we asked young men and adult men across the nation what they were willing and not willing to do about violence against women. And pretty overwhelmingly, actually, or 56% of men, they believed that domestic or sexual violence would directly affect them or someone that they knew. And many of them said also that they didn't know what to do about this issue. And when we gave them a number of options of things that they could do, such as contribute money or talk to their legislator, the one choice that overwhelmingly they chose was to talk to the young people in their lives about healthy relationships. That seemed to them the least threatening or difficult thing for them to do. And so as a result, Futures decided to create a public awareness campaign, and that's something that we generally do as a part of our programming to continue to further the conversation. And for that public awareness campaign, we created a number of PSAs, but I want to share with you the PSA that we have next, called the Now, we call it Now. And I just want to say really quickly that this video can be difficult to watch, so just bear that in mind. And this PSA was the first one that we created, and well, I'll tell you more about it after.
Tell me calm down. I hate that. I will knock you into next week. No, I'm not going to stop. That's it. We already got it. Get out! Right now. Get up. Get up. I said it.
I know it was hard to read the text, but what it was trying to communicate was, when do you get involved? And then each progressive time, is it now, is it now, is it now? And when we focus grouped this video with adult men, it did not go over well, mainly because they felt very unsure about what to do when it came to intervening in public or in front of their friends or in front of their family, and they found that to be far too threatening. So as a result, we continued to focus group other options in terms of creating other videos or other approaches. And the next video that we created, The Wrong Way Around, was far more successful.
Excuse me, I've been getting mixed messages about women and violence. I need a little clarification. How am I supposed to grow up to respect women when I have such lousy role models?
Boys are never going to approach you.
Can you help me to shape my attitudes towards women?
Violence against women is wrong.
I don't really need to explain why this one went better than the other one, do I? I mean, everyone here was more engaged. It's less frightening, and it also opens up possibility for change. You know, adult men can then say, oh yeah, of course my nephew is never going to approach me and ask me about relationships with women. It's my responsibility to do that. And so when we went live on this PSA, we got really an overwhelming response from a variety of folks across genders. And then, oh well, this clicker is very happy. We're almost there. Ha! Okay, so as we do, we actually went in 2007 and we did another national poll of adult men because we wanted to see what impact we had had over the course of those 7 years as we had put out those PSAs and also other public awareness campaigns. And in comparison to 2001, when we did the initial poll, which gave us about 26% or 29% of adult men were talking to the young people in their lives about violence against women, we actually were able to raise that in 2007 to 56%. And specifically, more fathers, about 68%, reported talking to their sons and 63% to their daughters. Now, the one change that we didn't see was that still that 56% of men knew someone or had experienced sexual violence that were self-reported. So from that, beyond the statistics that we see in front of us, actually the key insights that we had that have led us in the new direction for engaging men was that we had to appeal to the role model in men and help them feel empowered to do this work and help them feel empowered to talk to the young men in their lives. So oftentimes what we have to recognize is that we have to meet men where they are, and oftentimes, as Dr. Chu, I believe, spoke this morning, was saying that young men don't get those role models, that they don't get those opportunities to have these conversations. They're socialized in a very different way. So by the time they get to be adults, we have to undo some of that in order for us to be mindful of the work that we want them to do with the young people. And we have to invite them, and as we invite them into this conversation, we also have to give them very specific tools for how to do this work. And during this time that we were trying to suss out what we were going to do next with this information, what we realized was that the biggest platform and the most structured platform that we could reach men, adult men in, and even young men in, was in sports. And the benefits of sports actually is that you already have a built-in system where you have an adult man, presumably talking to a male student. And in those circumstances, we just wanted to insert some of this conversation. So that is what brought us to this next campaign called the Teach Early campaign. This is actually remastered from our, I believe, 2008 campaign, and then we brought it back up actually right after the Ray Rice incident. And I think it was a good kind of way to get started and bringing this conversation back to light.
Taught him how to hit a baseball. How to hit a receiver. The strength. The net. You taught him how to hit the upper quarter. You even taught him how to hit the open man. But how much time did he spend teaching him what not to hit?
So that, coupled with our Coaching Boys into Men program, actually was pretty provocative as well. It got some adult men and even some women to start thinking about kind of the juxtaposition that we have between sports and the aggression that comes with sports, and then figuring out where is the line between being aggressive or being violent. And it just showed that we had a good opportunity there. Oh. I thought it would be a good opportunity to get to know my dog, Penny, because this is a really hard day, and we all take solace in our beautiful animals. So here she is in her Christmas sweater. She still looks that cute, by the way. All right, let me try and get to the next slide. So anyways, my program, I say my program because I take a lot of ownership over kind of the world that is Coaching Boys into Men, but I did not create it. Coaching Boys into Men is, as Kevin said, an evidence-based program. I'm going to speak to it actually a little bit more, but I feel like the next video does it much better than I do, and frankly, I'm in the video too, so you can just hear me in there.
As a young man playing a sport, you are supposed to be aggressive, strong, unemotional.
We kind of have the sense that you have to intimidate the opponent.
I don't think anyone at this age has that level of self-esteem. So especially when you're in something like football, you're even more vulnerable. And I think that's what people lash out.
So what are some of the examples of disrespect behavior towards women and girls?
I've had some success playing college football and playing in the NFL, but I really felt like this is what I was called to do, was to mentor young men.
We know that sexual assault is a problem in our society. So Coaching Boys into Men is an evidence-based violence prevention program that is geared towards male athletes, specifically delivered by coaches. All they have to do is have these 15-minute conversations for 12 sessions throughout their season, and they might be preventing a future incident.
If you're walking with your mom to the grocery store, you don't want nobody yelling, "Hey, baby!" You would feel a certain type of way, right? Like, man, I ain't talking to my mom like that, right?
There was things in there that I noticed that I've done in the past, and like, with men, I just realized, I should change. So I started to buy into what Coach was telling us.
Led to a lot of really good discussions, a lot of really honest discussions about our lives and relationships.
Athletes have a lot of social capital, they're leaders in their community, and if they represent respect, nonviolence, and integrity, it then can spread like wildfire in a school.
I would say any principal, this is really where this way can go. It really will have an impact on the culture in the building.
You're creating the building blocks to empower our young men.
That duty falls on us to actually go out and prove to people that we can be in healthy relationships. I think that's happening.
Thanks, Kevin. Basically, what I have actually on the following slides is some of the topics that the coaches will cover in their actual in the curriculum. So partially, the coaches start with talking about personal responsibility, and they also talk about bragging about sexual reputation, digital disrespect, understanding consent, and communicating boundaries. And of course, these topics have to build over time. You can't just start with understanding consent. You have to start by building a community that feels safe, a space where the young people can finally start having these conversations. So the Coaching Boys into Men, you would think that, it's just 15 minutes once a week for 12 weeks, but actually we ran a rigorous randomized control trial, and it was conducted out of UC Davis by our chief evaluator, Elizabeth Miller, and it was in between 2009 and 2012, and it was funded by the CDC. And we basically had 8 schools that received the program and 8 schools that did not. And the 8 schools that received the program, we found a statistical significance in the increased knowledge of abusive behaviors for those that received it, increased intentions to intervene, increased actual positive bystander intervention. And when we returned at a year following, we surveyed those same athletes, and we were actually able to prevent future abuse perpetration, which is huge. And one of the things that it's translated into, and we're actually currently doing another study out of the University of Pittsburgh to see how it works in the middle school setting, and some of our emerging research findings for Coaching Boys into Men finds that of 100 athletes that receive Coaching Boys into Men, we can prevent 2 incidences of sexual violence, which seems low, but actually in SFUSD right now, we're implementing Coaching Boys into Men across the entire district, which involves 2,178 male athletes. And if those statistics follow, based on the current research findings, we're able to prevent, over the course of just 1 year, 43.5 incidences of sexual violence. And actually, the CDC has published results from compiling data from previous studies where they combined current administrative data from the 2011 U.S. National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, and they found that on average, the lifetime economic burden for rape for one survivor is $122,461, which seems low. And that's just a general average, and it includes medical costs, lost work productivity, criminal justice activities, or victim property loss or damage. And for us, what does that really mean? It means we're talking about sleepless nights, emergency room visits, missing days of work, jeopardizing your job, regular fear of retaliation, losing your home or your belongings. And this translates into the anguish that survivors feel day in and day out. These studies can give us only an approximate average of economic burden that we all know that the toll that the survivors pay after their assault, which is immeasurable. Now, if we go back to that statistic, if one sexual violence survivor, the economic burden is $122,000 approximately, then if we prevent 43.5 incidences of sexual violence in 1 year, we're actually going to prevent $5.3 million in the lost economic burden for survivors in just that 1 year, which is pretty significant. And as a result of receiving CBIM, athletes are actually estimated to have a 40% lower chance of becoming perpetrators of sexual assault. However, the most important question about coaching boys into men is, how does it work? Yes, the content is critical, such as learning the difference between abusive versus healthy relationship behaviors, but we've seen that many programs cover that content in a 1.5-hour assembly, and if that, in a room of 150 classmates that in that moment might feel like strangers. But what really matters beyond the content is how it's delivered, which is what makes it work. And it's the relationship that the coach has with their athletes and the relationship athletes to have with one another. The coach plays such a unique role in a young athlete's life. They teach and help them grow. They inspire and they mentor. Most athletes see their coaches as more than just their teachers and sometimes parents. It's the coach that makes this work, and it's the coach that makes this real. And what really takes us across the finish line is in behavior change on the team. The team is intrinsically working together towards the same goal, and they're trained to support one another and work as one. So learning as a team enhances the impact and absorption of the material. It's a powerful combination, actually. And for those 12 weeks, your teammates are like family. And when the team changes together, the possibility for changing attitudes and behaviors grow beyond and into the school, into their homes and their communities. So when people ask me, how do I adapt this program in different settings? The answer is that you have to replicate that environment and take the critical messages of the content and replicate that mentor-team experience, because relationships matter, and relationships is what makes this work. So my question now, in summary, is how do we continue to move the needle? How do we continue to make change? We need to create spaces for open, and I would go so far as to say healing and liberating conversations to flourish. We have to tap into the deep well of empathy that we all possess and create room for one another. Change doesn't happen in a vacuum. Change occurs in relationship. The social norms change that we seek begins here with all of us, and we can harness the power of relationships to move our communities forward. Before I close, I want to share one more story of my journey to find hope. This is what keeps me going day after day. Although I know this is not the case for all survivors, in the last year I've had the opportunity to rebuild a beautiful new relationship with my dad. Last year I summoned all the courage that I have to begin to work to repair our relationship, and so has he. And he's committed to change. And there have been some obstacles on this road to recovery. He's had a few moments where he has had trouble controlling his anger with my brother. I had the opportunity to speak with him actually after a few days after an altercation, during which he began to resist the conversation. But somehow in a moment of inspiration, I said to him, it doesn't matter why it happened. It matters what you do next. Next time you get angry, think of me. You think of the harm that you caused me, and remember that that is not the person that you want to be. You don't want those who love you to be afraid of you. So just think of me. And I can't say whether or not that's going to work forever, but he has yet to lose control in the last several months, which is a big start for us. And just 3 weeks ago, I got to share the most magical moment of my life with him. At Futures Without Violence, we hold an annual event with the San Francisco Giants called Strikeout Violence. And during the event, we hold a VIP brunch in the clubhouse, and we get to go out on the field. Strikeout Violence is actually a public event and an opportunity to shine the light on domestic and sexual violence to a sports audience. I summoned even deeper levels of courage and invited my dad to come. You see, my dad is a huge baseball fanatic. And some of you may know that there's a new Puerto Rican baseball pitcher, Derek Rodriguez. If you didn't know, now you do. And I was able to get and obtain a signed baseball by Derek, and my dad got to touch the grass on the field. I can't describe the joy we had that day, and it's a testament to the power of sports to bring us together and create a space that we could share and learn to love once again. In those moments, I hearken back to the brilliance of James Baldwin, and he states, "Love takes off the masks that we fear we cannot live without and know we cannot live within." I use the word love here, not merely in the personal sense, but as a state of being or a state of grace, not in the infantile American sense of being made happy, but in the tough and universal sense of quest and daring and growth. On my quest to find hope, these moments with my dad will stay with me forever, and it will fuel me even on days like today. As Emily Dickinson said, this world is not conclusion, and so we are left with no other option than to keep fighting and to keep hoping. Thank you.